What's going on, everybody? It's Picsoleated, and I know we've been looking at headphones on this channel for quite a while now, but today we are looking at a gaming display, a gaming monitor. It is Sony's Inzone M9. It's Sony's first foray into gaming monitors geared towards the PC gamer. Don't get me wrong, this monitor has every feature that will make your PS5 experience great, but it's just as good, if not better, than a typical 4K 144Hz monitor for PCs. And while you can push this monitor to its greatest performance on the PC, you could do the same with your PS5, and as someone who owns both, I did it with both, and let me tell you, it was a fun time. I think Sony's doing a smart thing here where they're creating a product that is for that sort of fusion market of gamers who have both devices. Of course, you can still use this monitor if you just own a PC or if you just own a PS5, but it does great for both platforms. And while I would argue that a gaming monitor is usually geared towards PC gamers, they're the ones who typically want to get a gaming monitor for their PC instead of plugging their computer into a large TV, whereas PS5 console owners or just console owners in general will typically want to game on a TV to get that big television, big screen experience. The visual design of the Inzone M9 is clearly inspired by none other than the Sony Playstation 5 gaming console. The stand is almost like a distorted, slanted version of the PS5. And I know what I'm saying, I get it, the PS5 is already somewhat slanted and distorted already. But does this thing perform as great on the PS5 as we expect it to? Well, before we find out, make sure to turn the brightness up on that like button. If you happen to enjoy this video at any point, boost the saturation on that subscribe button for more videos, and make sure to turn the 120Hz performance mode on that noti bell so you don't miss out on future videos. And if you think this monitor might be for you, I've left a link in the description where you can go ahead and check it out. Now let's get to the review. Now when talking about the Inzone M9, the first thing you really have to call out is the design. It's such a striking design for a monitor and for very obvious reasons. Now, while some design choices are very clearly inspired by this generation's PlayStation aesthetic, those same design choices that really catch your eye on this monitor do come with some compromises. The main thing that really doesn't do it for me is the stand. While it does have a striking look and it will be hideous to some and beautiful to others, there are some issues that we'll all universally have to deal with on this monitor. While the stand itself is relatively easy to install, you just take the two wide legs, slot them into the back of the PS5 looking piece and screw them in, flip it over, and click the monitor into place. I actually found this a lot easier than typical monitor stands, but right after that come the issues. We have this very subtle cable management slot that allows you to slide cables through to sort of neatly organize your cables, but when doing so, I found myself having to snake one cable in at a time because it's so narrow and somewhat small. And even after that, once I plugged it into the monitor, the ports were so close to that cable management slot that I couldn't even adjust the monitor. The M9 stand does allow you to adjust the height and tilt of the monitor to a certain degree, but as soon as I slid those cables in and plugged them into the back of the monitor, I almost lost all adjustability just because the cables were so tight. There was little to no slack and it wouldn't allow me to move the monitor up or down. One way to alleviate this a little bit was to sort of push the cables in a little bit more, so it allowed a little more slack for the cables, but it still wasn't easy to execute. I had to sort of push each one in one by one a little bit. It's really a cumbersome feeling, and it's not something I would want to experience with an expensive monitor like this, especially with a visually striking design like this. That whole experience made me realize that if you do get this monitor, definitely base mount it or put it on a monitor arm. However, when you do something like this, it really kind of hits you in the gut, because if you like the look of that monitor stand, which you will if you are a PS5 owner and you want it to match your PS5, you kind of lose out on that look. And by then, the visuals of the monitor really fade away into the darkness because the rest of the visuals are on the back of the monitor, and that's something you'll probably never see once you set your monitor up. Unless you see the back of your desk a lot, which I think would be weird, but who knows? Some people do. Aesthetically, I do love the design of this monitor, except for those wide legs that stand out. Those are definitely hideous. If they would have found a way to keep that centerpiece that looks like a PS5, but not have those wide legs and still have the monitor stable and standing, I think that would have been the best approach. I don't know how it would have been done, but now while you don't need a PS5 to enjoy this device, it's definitely got that PS5 aesthetic, especially with the all white in the back, contrasting with the front sort of black bezels and edges of the screen. There is an integrated LED light bar in the back of the monitor, however, it's not very noticeable. It's not a strong light at all. You do have the ability to customize the light that comes out of it, the color of the light that comes out of it, but again, it's very unnoticeable. It doesn't even reach the back wall that my monitor and my desk is sitting against, not even in a dark room. Again, it's one of those things that you'll probably not notice ever again once you set up your monitor, unless you see the back of your desk alive. For you weirdos, it'll probably be okay. Now moving on to the features, the Inzone M9 has an extensive selection of ports, starting off with the two HDMI 2.1 ports, which are very important if you want 120Hz on your PS5 or even your Xbox Series X. Yes, I included the Xbox in this. You can even connect both since they're two HDMI 2.1 ports. We've got the one display port, we've got one USB-C port that can allow you to charge devices as well. It's got a 100-watt charging, 3 USB-A ports, one USB-B port. Plenty of options here for you daily users, for whatever you would want to use a monitor for. If you want to use one of those ports as a KVM switch, I forget which one it is, but you can use one of them. One display feature that really stands out to me for the M9 is the full array local dimming with 96 zones. Now, local dimming isn't common for monitors at this price point. With this feature set, usually, or slightly below this price point, you usually have to pay a lot more for something like that, though you think it should be at such a high price. This is kind of steep in my opinion. Although with all the new technology in it, it's kind of understandable. Usually what you'll get is edge-lit dimming, which is a lot worse than full array local dimming. And this is important because even my current monitor, which is a 4K 144Hz monitor, it has HDMI 2.1. It is the DOS Spectrum, or previously known as the Eve Spectrum. Yes, that company has a troubled history, and I still ended up buying their monitor. So far it's been good to me, but it only has 16 local zones, and it's edge-lit dimming. It's not full array local dimming. Before we even get into a demo, like 16 to 96 is a big jump already. So all this technical jargon basically means that when HDR is enabled, every time something bright pops up in the screen, certain areas of your monitor have to be lit up to make it as bright as possible to allow for that high dynamic range, aka HDR, to perform as well as it can. The less dimming zones you have, the larger the area that has to be lit up, which can create some sort of a negative effect and slight blooming around parts of the screen that should not be having that type of blooming effect. Here's a demonstration of what it looks like when you have full array local dimming 96 zones on the Inzone M9 versus my current monitor, the DOS Spectrum, previously known as the Eve Spectrum, with only 16 local dimming zones. As you can tell, the HDR performance on the Inzone M9 is much better. As the dot moves around, you can tell only a portion of the screen lights up, whereas on the Eve Spectrum, you could tell a whole bar from the top to the bottom lights up wherever the dot moves. Now, this is an extreme example, and you probably won't see this while you're gaming or while you're watching something on YouTube or on a video app. However, you will notice it in darker scenes. Like when I was playing Resident Evil 2 to test it out, I really just had to turn HDR off, especially on my current screen. For the most part, you don't really notice it, but if there are scenes with really big differences in dark and light areas, you will start to notice that blooming effect. You will start to notice that a whole portion of your screen has been lit up slightly more than the rest of the screen, and it can sort of take you out of the moment or take you out of whatever you're watching or playing. And this is where 96 local dimming zones makes a big difference to 16 local dimming zones. Oh, just to clarify, even though my monitor, the DOS Spectrum 4K, has edge-lit dimming, those 16 zones are still local dimming zones. The Inzone M9 also has PS5 specific features like auto picture adjustment. Basically what it does is it changes the picture mode from game to video as soon as you go from like a video game to putting on an app like YouTube or Crave or any other streaming app. It automatically detects that you're watching video instead of playing games, and it switches the picture mode for you. I also noticed as soon as I plugged the PS5 into the Inzone M9 and turned it on, it automatically adjusted the HDR settings for me. Clearly, Sony has put some thought into this to make this more PS5 friendly and to give you a little added benefit if you own a PS5 and want to use it with this monitor. You won't get this with pretty much any other non-Sony display. The Sony Inzone M9 is a 4K monitor that is capable of 144Hz. Through the DisplayPort cable, with HDMI 2.1, you can get 4K 120Hz on your gaming console, specifically the PS5 or the Xbox Series X. For whatever reason, HDMI 2.1 is not capable of 144Hz 4K. Hardware-wise, I think it is, but for whatever reason, it's not allowed at the moment. Most likely due to stability or software issues. It might be one of those things where a firmware update in the future will allow that to be unlocked. It's not capable right now. who knows what the real reason is. Next feature is the OSD. The on-screen display is packed full of features, which is a real surprise to me considering this is Sony's first foray into real gaming monitors. Not talk about that 3D display that they came out with in the PS3 era. That doesn't count. There are many settings to play around with in the on-screen display, including picture presets, gaming assist with features like toggling adaptive sync, response time, black equalizer options, even with a bevy of crosshair options to choose from to help with your shoddy aim. Like I mentioned earlier, you can even change the color of the LED in the back of the monitor. To access the on-screen display, you use the nubbins on the right side of the display. I'm happy they placed it on the right side of the display. It feels much more natural and ergonomic versus having a nub in the back middle of the monitor. My current monitor has a nub in the bottom center, and it just feels awkward to sort of reach down that way versus reaching out to the right. Sony also has its own Inzone Hub app that you can use to adjust the settings on the monitor directly through Windows instead of using the on-screen display, which I think is really cool. It's very intuitive, and of course it's a lot easier to use your mouse and adjust settings as opposed to, reaching your hand around controlling a stick behind the monitor that you can't really see. One issue I do notice with the control stick is that it feels slightly too long, to the point that sometimes when I'm trying to click it down to access the main menu, I accidentally click it to the left, activating the volume control instead. Again, this monitor is base mountable, so if you want to mount it on a monitor arm or on a wall mount, you can definitely do that. That is what I would recommend for this monitor. Me, as a PS5 owner, I do like the way the stand looks and I would love to keep the stand, but after dealing with its sort of nuances, I would definitely prefer a monitor arm. It also allows me to adjust my monitor more freely and have it further back on my desk. Now, when it comes to performance and actually playing games on the monitor, 144Hz 4K performs great on the PC. Excellent performance, it looks buttery smooth. The HDR on PC was good as well. I didn't feel like it was doing anything too crazy. It wasn't sort of outstanding in any way, but outside of some slight issues of trying to adjust the HDR settings properly in some games where it was a little more finicky than I've experienced in the past, I had a pretty good experience. The performance was great, and the 96 zones definitely allowed me to not see sort of large areas of the monitor being lit up because of something bright on that part of the screen. Another thing this monitor does well is color accuracy. Sony displays are famed for their supreme color representation on their panels, and this monitor is no exception. The Inzone M9 sports a 95% DCI P3 rating, which is pretty damn good. The Inzone M9 is also Display HDR 600 certified, which is a good rating. It lets you know that it meets like a good standard for HDR. Now, it also performs well with the PS5. The HDMI 2.1 is a great feature to have. It gives you that 120Hz 4K buttery performance, especially on Sony exclusives and other games that fully support those settings, like Spider-Man Miles Morales, Ratchet & Clank, God of War. I can play all these games on 4K 120Hz with VRR on, which again, variable refresh rate, and ALLM, auto low latency mode. All these settings are settings that will make your PS5 experience better, and this monitor has all of those. What amazes me is just how responsive PS5 exclusive games are on 4K fidelity mode with all these settings on, because typically when you play on fidelity mode or any graphics mode in these games where fidelity is prioritized over frames, you're sort of limited to 30 FPS, but with VRR it allows that limit to be unlocked, creating a more fluid experience. There are times where I'm playing in fidelity mode where it almost feels like I'm playing in 60 FPS mode from time to time. It's really a big difference. As a game changer, because I think that's what a lot of us are sort of trying to capture, is trying to get that 4K experience, but with a more fluid frame rate. 30 FPS at this point in this generation just feels too jittery, too slow for most of us. While playing games on this monitor is fun, it's really great. It gets a little more messy when HDR is turned on. Now, while the monitor, the M9, is Display HDR 600 certified with peak 600 nits of brightness, there are a handful of issues we get when the HDR is turned on the PS5, and it might just be a monitor issue. It might actually just be a software issue, because some of these do happen on my other monitor that I have, but I'll go through them anyway. First being the flickering. When you have HDR turned on, certain games you will notice a little bit of flickering, like Ratchet & Clank, God of War, Spider-Man, all the games that I played that are exclusive to Sony, and even other games, you notice a little bit of flickering when you're playing the game. It usually starts off in the beginning of the game and tends to get better over time, which is kind of weird. It's almost like the monitor is learning as you go what the actual frame rate is and what, like, how to calibrate everything. It's really a weird experience, and I feel like you shouldn't be experiencing that. They should have fixed that before releasing this technology out into the wild. The second thing is the screen blanks for a few seconds between switching games or even in game sometimes. There was one time I was playing Ratchet and Clank and the screen just blanked out for about 3 to 4 seconds mid-combat, and that's the worst time for that to happen. The third one is pretty rare, but it's happened to me a couple of times where I'm playing and the screen blanks for a few seconds, and when it comes back, you sort of get this washed out picture as if saturation was turned all the way down to maybe like 10 out of 100. Again, I would say this is more of a software issue, software not being up to spec to the hardware and the technology that's being presented to us. I imagine a lot of this will be corrected down the line with firmware updates for the monitor, for the PS5, for your PC, whatever the case. I don't really notice it on PC, it's more of a PS5 thing, so actually it might just be an HDMI 2.1 thing. Overall, the visual performance on this monitor is stellar. I love the color representation. I enjoyed the buttery smooth 120Hz experience on PS5, and even the fidelity mode experience with VRR and auto low latency mode activated. The HDR was good too. It was nothing crazy. The 96 local dimming zones, and I know what you're saying, shut up about the local dimming zones already. I'm trying to, but it does do a really good job in sweetening that HDR deal when it works well. Moving on to the price, the Inzone M9 retails at $899 US and 1,299 Canadian dollars. Now the price I feel is a little steep, not just in the States, but also in Canada. I think more so in Canada, but anything in the market that's pretty much bleeding edge tech, that has all the latest features as well as a bevy of ports, I feel like will be around this price point, if not a little higher. If you want that 4K 144Hz experience out of your monitor, as well as HDMI 2.1 for that 120Hz 4K experience out of your PS5 or Xbox Series X, then this monitor comes in at a somewhat respectable price for the performance that it gives you. However, you are paying a little bit more for all those extra ports and that sort of PS5, PlayStation, Sony cachet. If all you want is the HDMI 2.1 and that 4K 144Hz 120Hz experience, you can definitely find monitors that are not as spec'd out, with fewer ports and probably not as many dimming zones for a somewhat better price. Okay, moving on to the good and bad of this monitor. The first thing, of course, is the visual fidelity. Color representation is great. The actual performance of the display is outstanding. It is the Sony Inzone M9, and Sony's display technology has always been something of a marvel. The next thing is the OSD, the on-screen display. It's super feature-packed for Sony's first foray into PC gaming monitors. It even surprised me. There was a time when I went into the picture settings tab and a lot of the things were grayed out. Apparently, if you just turn HDR off, it activates them again. It didn't activate it for me, but after a while of just adjusting things, at some point I got there where I was able to adjust everything. Your mileage may vary on that one. The next thing is the design. I absolutely love the eccentric design of this monitor. The white back of the monitor contrasts with the black edges on the front, and it gives you that exact PlayStation aesthetic that you get from the PS5. So if you want to match it with your PS5, you can do that. And while the stand is objectively hideous, it holds a special place in my heart for looking like a distorted version of an already distorted PlayStation 5. It's got a feature-rich port selection that will allow for pretty much anything you want to do that you would do with a gaming monitor or a PC monitor. You can do that with this monitor, all the while having the best features technology has to offer right now. Moving on to the bad, the HDR performance can be a little finicky, but this is also partially a software issue because it seems to be a recurring problem with monitors of this feature set and of this caliber. The next thing is the stand. I mean, it's not just an eyesore, it also hinders the maneuverability of the monitor. It also makes me feel like I'm about to break my cables because of the tension it creates with such a short distance from the port to the cable management slot. The next thing is the price point. While it's not the worst price point, it's not super expensive, it's also not that cheap. It is a little steep for most people who are looking for a monitor for their PS5 gaming console. If you're a PC gamer, you've already spent probably a ton on your PC, or if you're one of those people that did spend a ton on your PC because you can't build a budget PC, then maybe the price is no issue for you, but for the people building budget PCs and for the people playing on gaming consoles and buying gaming consoles because they're much cheaper than really good gaming PCs, the price of this monitor might just seem a little too steep. On top of that, you can definitely find monitors that have that 4K 144Hz performance as well as HDMI 2.1 for that 4K 120Hz performance through your gaming console for lower prices than this. And finally, it's the lack of cables in the box. Come on, Sony, at least give us an HDMI 2.1 cable. That's all we ask. That's my review for Sony's first serious foray into gaming monitors, the Inzone M9. If you think this monitor is for you, I've left a link in the description where you can go ahead and check it out. Does this monitor interest you, or do you know if anyone's getting the Inzone M9? What are your thoughts on it? Let me know below. Catch you in the next one. This display's got pixelated in the zone once again.